Thank you, Viking Preparedness and Nicole Marie and Unicorn Hollow Homestead. I will not be able to chat back with you, but we can see your comments and can answer to them. And I wanted to introduce everyone to Sharon Darling. She has a channel, Heart of a Torah Woman, and she's the one who was willing to do the interview. So I'm going to turn it over to her. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm glad you reached out. I really enjoyed reading this book. I really enjoy chats with others, especially the other ladies, and getting to know you more and seeing more of what's in your heart and stories that you have and things that you write like this, which was such a blessing to me. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. And I guess we can just kind of roll with it and get into it. And
yeah, I'm ready.
I have I have questions that aren't stuff that you necessarily wrote in your book, but I was
Okay.
hoping that you could kind of expound upon it. And some of it has to do with like I'm a homeschool mom, and I mainly actually I address women, and I know there's a whole bunch of them that that I'm connected with, and others that reach out to me. They're very interested in things like this. Some of them are very experienced. Some of them have their own farms. I have a friend who has a 5-acre farm that they've been doing for a while now. Others that have maybe like chickens, and that's about it. Maybe some gardening. But one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, what would you hope for the biggest takeaway for your book for someone that reads it?
Biggest takeaway, hopefully a more realistic view of what the process might be like, and to have a sort of a foundation, a basis in a general way, and in their mind be able to then set the goals that they would have for themselves. Given that I've tried to, I've said it on the other podcasts, it's more of a guidebook for homesteading. And yes, we can see you all. Hey, Grandma Ginger's Farm and J.A. Dudley, welcome, welcome. It's more of a guidebook. So it's more like a notes versus a fully filled out encyclopedic knowledge of all things homesteading. And so what I was hoping it would do for people would be, all right, so I have these certain, not obstacles, but goals that I should look at. I should realistically think, okay, I'm out of debt now. What do I want my homestead to look like? What sort of things, even in your mind to picture, I want a little pond here and I want some trees here, and this is going to be where the garden is. So when they actually go look at property, they'll be able to say, okay, this definitely is not what I was thinking of, but this over here is close. So that's going to be my number one. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the book does a really, really good job of that. It is not overwhelming, and it's a lot of information, but in bite-sized pieces that is easy to comprehend, and it's realistic. And that was one of my favorite things about it, because it's like, oh, this really is realistic, even if you don't have a lot of financial means, or you're not really sure where you can go, or maybe even not being able to afford much land, but you can still figure out a way to do it. And I know there's a ton of families that want to do it, but even someone like us, where you feel like it's just so out of reach. So this
Right.
actually gives some hope in that way of like, it's realistic. It's and I think that's a really big deal. So that's really exciting.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So and then so I would like to hear a little bit more about you and your
Okay.
journey to where you are now for homeschooling, sorry, homesteading. I'm used to
Sure.
saying homeschooling, homesteading, and um, where you came to writing this to help others with their own journey to realizing it's realistic and making it become a reality for them as well.
Okay. So our homesteading journey it's little bits of fits and starts, I'm going to say. When I was young, I spent 4 years in the hills of Indiana as a barefoot Hoosier, and learned a lot of, information in general about farming from friends and so on. Then after I got married and my husband, he was in the military, he did all 20 years, he did a full career. Um, I would do like little tests, along the way. I'd plant a few things here in this military quarters, or I might, we kept a rabbit for a little while and we had dogs. And eventually there was a situation when we were in a third world country and he was doing his thing. And I had um, a 9-month-old and like a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And so I was kind of deciding, all right, well, we're in this third world country. It's going to be easier for me to get chickens. I'm going to try getting chickens. And so I took scrap from construction sites and made a little teeny coop for 2 chickens, and then went to a local, what would be considered a gas station, like a little stop and shop. And the clerks there, I asked them for 2 chickens, and they kind of, I spoke their language, and we kind of made sure it's like, it's not a bird I'm going to eat. I want it to lay eggs. And they got on a scooter and rode into their village and grabbed 2 of their chickens, put them in a Walmart bag and brought them back.
Wow.
And charged me like 50 cents a piece. And so those were my first 2 hens ever. And I kept them for a little while. And then the next place we moved was a suburban neighborhood. I was homeschooling at the time. We had planted some things. There was a pretty extensive garden area there. And so we were looking into what was available to eat naturally growing in there, blackberries everywhere. And so that's when we had our next set of chickens and incubated eggs. And so it was a process. And then eventually, for where we are here, this was sort of the midlife crisis move to property we had already bought, because we both knew we wanted to be rural after his career was over. And it segued at the same time with a faith walk, where we went from being pretty hardcore Christians, non-denominational, to discovering Torah. And then sort of a joint, what am I trying to say? Kind of a joint ministry, not really joint, but parallel ministry with another Torah observant congregation. And it all just kind of coalesced to us moving to this land, which was absolutely bare, not a well on it, seasonal creek, only rocks and trees. And so we took all the knowledge that he had learned in the military and I had been playing with in the civilian world, and started to put all those skills to work and started homesteading here. And because the finances started off grid too. So we've been doing that about 11 years. And it was 3 years ago when I got the unction, you could say a Holy Spirit, tap on the shoulder, whatever, to do what I considered like a guidebook for the Oregon Trail. So, sorry. The Oregon Trail settlers could buy guidebooks that other people had written that had little tips and tricks for going from, St. Louis out to Oregon. And they would be written by people who may not have necessarily done the trip themselves. That's the part that was kind of like, so then you wind up with unfortunate people like the Donner Party who were in the Rockies in the middle of winter when you shouldn't have been, because some of the guidebooks were false. But the general idea was, well, here's where a watering hole is. Here's a place you can, spend the night and let your cattle eat. Here's where a river crossing is. And so I wanted this to be more like a guidebook for homesteading by someone who actually had done it, with real tips. And so that kind of where that started. And I wrote it out really quickly. And then I asked several people to edit it for me. And they were too busy, some of them. And I was not in the right mindset to be able to do it myself. Plus my knowledge of, editing and printing and everything was 25 years out of date. So I had one sister edit it for me initially. And then we ran into a stumbling block where my software and her software didn't match up. And then she got busy. And so it was another Holy Spirit moment when another sister, excuse me, Sarah Williams of DeBarring Publishing, had just published her own second book. I Saw the Earth Wake Up. Yeah, you know all about that. And she and I were at a feast celebration together, and we started talking about that. And she said, "Oh yeah, I'm thinking of starting a publishing company." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, well, will you do editing too? Because I got a thing." And that's how this came about. And so it was a short time between when we had that conversation, maybe 6-8 months, and then till this is actually the way it is now.
That's interesting. I knew she had somebody that she was working with. I just didn't know it was you. But it's
It's me.
it was really neat and it was exciting to see. And it's nice to have someone like her that has our background like this
Right.
and
It's
willing to help.
amazing.
Mm. So that's really good. I think that's a really interesting story, and I like the 2 chickens you started with. That's very interesting, and so you had little kids when you did that, and actually that can roll into something else I wanted to ask was,
Sure.
there's a lot of families, and especially mothers, who homeschool, and, a lot of them have little kids too.
Hmm.
What is your advice when either whether they're kind of seasoned or even brand new to wanting to live this kind of lifestyle when they have
Hmm.
children and so you're trying to juggle children, normal life and homeschooling, how do you fit that in there with the life of homesteading as well, and what would like your little tips hints be for um, kind of merging that all together and still I guess keeping your sanity and it
Sure.
just kind of working well as
Yeah.
can be expected anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's not going to be one answer. It's going to be a couple of different
Mhm.
points of view there. But I found as a homeschooling mom with young kids that to expect yourself to be like a school was absolutely unrealistic.
Mm.
To think that you were going to have a classroom and sit in there for 8 straight hours with, a 5-year-old or whatever. And also for them to be disciplined enough to want to sit at a desk for how long and write and whatever. So I'm way more lackadaisical than that. So I try to do much more hands-on things with them. And I realized it only took, or we could do that about 2 hours in a day, 2.5 hours. But also, I'm the kind of person who would be bored to death in a classroom like that. And so I started to incorporate more of real life into the homeschooling, especially with littles. And so I think getting your littles involved in your life is the best way to do it. And so, shalom, everybody. Shalom, Cassie and Trying and Mark and Palmetto. Yay, shalom. We can see your comments, but I can't type anything back. And anyway, let me keep going. So one of the things we did there was we bought these huge plastic tubs because you can't buy them here in the States. It wasn't until recently anybody carried them in a store. And so we bought some of those, put them on our porch, filled them with water. And then we bought guppies and stuck them in one, and we bought little turtles and put them in the other, and then watched as they multiplied and the turtles grew. And, it was a nature project in reality. Um, and something I always like to do with my kids is go to parks or zoos or any of those kind of living, uh, what am I trying to say? Living examples, trees, flowers, birds, whatever. We would go to an illegal Indonesian market together and shop, which was kind of, oh, there goes a deer, speaking of live stuff, which is pretty controversial there because these Indonesians, well, actually, I won't get into all that, but the people who were putting the market on were illegal in the country, and yet every like Thursday, they would set out goods, and I would go there with my kids, and we would buy stuff. And so that was a real experience for them to see a culture within a culture. And so as we went on, like when I moved into the suburban area and we kept chickens, each kid got a chicken. Now it's a more personal experience. We're going to feed them, we're going to water them, we're going to gather the eggs, we're going to incubate them. Now we have chicks, your hen has a chick. I found that a really easier way for me to homeschool And the other things I did, which is really unconventional, because there weren't a lot of curriculum when I was doing this, was to just incorporate things like Ranger Rick magazine, National Geographic magazine, sit and read the articles, look at the pictures. We would get used encyclopedias at library sales and go through them. One of them that I really liked had a whole thing on games. And so we learned older games that people played, 100 years ago that were good for, one of them was called Kim's Game. It's a memory game. It's really easy and it helped them build their memory. And another thing I did was use video games and lessons, because there were some. I don't know if they still have them now. Everything's online. But one of them was a scientific one where you did little physics problems at the beginning of the game. And then at the end, you could build a thing like a car or a plane, and it competed with one that the game had. And you could figure out from how yours did whether you needed to go back and get a new part that was an upgrade to the other one. And it taught my son um, a lot about mechanics and gears and all sorts of things like that, electronics. And I had games for spelling, reading, little frog hopping swamp video game, and the kids loved playing it. So I liked to mix it all up.
Mm.
And then as I got older, we would do real world things. We went to Colonial Williamsburg. They had a homeschooling weekend. And so the homeschooling kids got to do things like go into the print shop and actually do some, with the ink and the leather thing and stamp some things. They actually turned a windmill. All the homeschool kids got on an arm off this windmill and pushed the windmill and repositioned it. So that's kind of where I come from for homeschooling. And if you wanted to apply that to homesteading, then I would say even the littles, have them get involved.
Mm.
And my own grandkids, some of them are like 3, 5 years old, are milking their milk cow. They are out there planting in their garden. They are, feeding and watering chickens and moving uh, animals from place to place, because they use electronic fencing. And so they'll unhook the fence and they'll all stand there like a human fence, and they'll drive their geese from one pasture to another, helping butcher animals, helping cook that food or turn that milk into cheese. I think that's the way to have the homeschooling happen, and not worry so much about, well, I've definitely got to sit down here and teach them mathematics, and those things can come too, but just teaching your child to learn will really help homeschooling
Mm.
versus, you know, rote memorization or
Yeah.
being able to sit still for a certain amount of time. So there you go. Long answer. Sorry.
No, that's I I like those kind of answers. It's and there's more opportunity now for homeschoolers.
Mhm.
And when our oldest was younger, it wasn't something that was as popular as it is now. And
Right.
so it was different and there wasn't a lot to do. And unfortunately, we didn't have the even the setting we're in now. So to at least have these opportunities and to think at least of this is how you can incorporate it is still nice, because even when you're either a little rural or even somewhat urban, you can still find ways to at least plant things now. And it's easier and more places allow that too. But I really like hearing the stories of ways to incorporate even littles into just life, because
Right.
there's an awful lot of sit down, do this worksheet, learn these things, but it's more memorization. Life is more than that. And I really
Yeah.
like seeing this is how we live life. I mean, we have a whole generation now of adults who are young and have to keep calling people because they don't know how to do things.
Right.
And, there was an awful lot of failings of a lot of adults that didn't teach those things to
Right.
this generation. So there was a lot of failings. So I
Like
love
like
seeing
counting
this.
money back.
Yeah, it's sad. So this is really really good. And homeschooling, I think, gives a lot of opportunities to learn when you homeschool, and even if you're just gardening, it's at least instead of just looking at pictures or YouTube videos, which is great for the different things that we can see, but
Sure.
seeing it in life, that was a lot of fun when our kids were younger. Be at least that we had I tried gardening. Sometimes it wasn't so good,
Right.
but it was
Sometimes
nice.
it doesn't.
Mhm.
That's a
Sometimes it's
lesson
great.
too.
And sometimes the woodchucks come in and decimate your garden, and you find
That's
out the
right.
hard way in the
But
middle of the
that's the
city.
reality. Yeah, exactly. That's a lesson in and of itself. And then to watch you say, all right, well, I guess we're going to have to try it again or figure out a way to keep the woodchucks out. Problem solving,
Yes, and they go after and the animals go after some of the plants and not others.
right?
And so they'll leave a bunch of stuff that you expected them to go after, and then what you really didn't want them to go after is what they go after, and you're like, "Oh, I gotta figure this out." And it's
Yeah.
nice
Well,
problem solving.
there's a little bit of uh gosh, the words just are not coming to me. There's a sort of a relief in knowing the natural things that you can eat as well. So in case like the deer just ate every one of your potato plants, there's still blackberries out there or
Mm,
walnuts or acorns or, lamb's quarter, that if we get nothing from the garden, we're not going to starve, kids. We can still figure these things out. And that I find relief. That's the word I was looking for. I find relief in knowing that.
and that actually rolls into something else too. I love
All right.
that. Speaking of the finding things that are edible, you had mentioned that in your book as well. How would you recommend safely finding things that are edible, whether it's on your property or if you happen to be at a park or somewhere where it's okay to take those things. I personally didn't know things of where we grew up our entire lives. We lived there 40 years. And I did not know, well, less than 40 years. It took me to realize it because it was years ago someone showed me. But I was like, no, these are wild, there was wild carrots, walnuts, which I mean, it sounds silly to some people, but when you're not exposed to these things, you don't know. And it's so funny because the trail that I walked my entire life for decades, I found that there was grapes, there were walnuts, there
Oh,
were wild carrots and all kinds of things. And it was a neighbor of ours that took us, the kids and I, and was like, hey, look at this, and showed it. And this person is very, very good with edibles. So, how would you recommend finding those kinds of things, and any books that you would recommend or resources that you would consider reputable and trustworthy to do that?
sure. I think you touched on one of the things. It's a great question. Excuse me. One thing is your local resource, like your neighbor. Some of the wild edibles, I know an older lady who was a friend of the family showed me. And I got into a conversation with her about the depression because she was a child. And she's like, oh, well, let me show you these things. So that's one. If you're around a park, then go ask the park rangers. If they're not on site, go to their headquarters and say, okay, what's our local edibles in our park? And have them go show you that tree, that bush, whatever. Your county extension would be a good place. There's also Peterson's Field Guides. They're a series of books. They will have pictures of edibles in specific locations like the
Hmm.
Northeast or the Southwest. Um, Carla Emery's Encyclopedia of Country Living is a really good resource for all things rural. Reader's Digest even has a book called Back to Basics, which has a lot of information in there about all kinds of things. Um, and so that would be about my top 4 or 5 for your wild edibles and stuff. There's nothing wrong with looking online and seeing pictures and videos of it, but it's even better if you can in person have someone show you. And even here on this property, the real estate agent who showed it to us knew the area and knew things and was able to point things out to me. So there's a lot of different ways, and it is a good idea to get more than one backup to, yep, that definitely is a grapevine, or yep, that definitely that's a wild carrot. 2 or 3 witnesses establishes as a fact, right?
And being shown in person, I can definitely say it's definitely different than I've looked at books before, but having our neighbor actually show and have it in their hands and show us how to tell, that was definitely different and makes you feel a little bit way more comfortable of, okay, that
Exactly.
it because it's different when you're just looking at pictures. You can figure it
Right.
out, but it's nice when you have someone actually with experience showing you this. and you know
And
you
also
can trust.
tell you you can eat it raw or cook it, or this is how you cook it, or this is how you process it. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important. I like that story you told about Jewel. That was really that's special to have someone like that that teaches and passes things down, and that you can discuss things with and spend those times with it. And it winds up being very special, and you can look back at it and pass
Right,
that
a
on too.
treasured memory, treasured experience, absolutely.
And then you can pass it on later on. So
That's
that's
right,
really
and I
nice.
have.
Yeah, I like that. Um, oh yeah, something that I was this wouldn't apply to someone like me, but what would your advice be to someone that wants to start whether it's gardening or especially homesteading when they want to start it later in life? So when they're not quite so young anymore and it's not quite so easy to move around, lift things, walk around, especially on a little bit more rough terrain. Would your advice be if they want to start what you wrote about?
Okay, so that's another really great question, and I'll just let you know our homesteading experience here started when we were 50. So we were not young. Actually, my best advice is start it as soon as you can. If you're younger, go ahead and jump into the homestead experience, because as you get older, it will get harder, obviously. It's going to be like, I can't turn back time, but if you think you're going to be interested in this, you should be in some sort of decent physical shape,
Mhm,
because there's a reality to, if you aren't, you may not be able to make it happen.
mhm,
And so you want to be realistic about that. And if you're not in great shape, start trying to get in better shape. Even just walking, and doing some sort of, arm, a little bit of weightlifting or flexing and stuff to build up a little bit of arm strength will help.
mhm,
Now, the other thing that's going to make it easier would be, and this is advice we've told lots of people, don't try to start from scratch. There nowhere is it written in the Bible or anywhere else that it says thou shalt have to go to bare ground. You
mhm,
know, there's plenty of farms and homesteads, excuse me, and mini farms already started that for whatever reason people will sell. And so if you can afford it, buy that. Buy something with buildings on it already, with fencing, with a well or a water source, a barn, even with livestock. If they're like, well, we'll throw in the chicken flock with it, do that, so that you don't have to have, the experience of pounding fence poles and attaching fence and, um, cutting down a bunch of trees if you want to clear an area. And so that's going to be my number. That's my best advice from people, is to try to get a homestead already started, or a farm or something that requires very little in the way of upgrading or updating or anything like that. Now, if you have skills, if you're a carpenter, or you've done it before, then, by all means, buy that 120-year-old farmhouse that has no plumbing in there and fix it up yourself, because there's plenty of people that can do that too. For my husband and I, because of how we've been living, we had many, many skills. And we lived in for 2.5 years in a camping trailer, 8 by 17 feet, with no heat or running water. And it still doesn't have heat or running water.
mhm,
But because we camped and been in different temperatures and he was a Boy Scout leader, I was a Girl Scout leader, we had lots of training,
mhm,
we were able to do that and be all right
mhm,
and be comfortable. So yeah, that's my number one right there. You can be older and do this, because we're proof of it,
mhm,
but you can't be older and very sick, or very poor, and have it be as easy as you probably want it to be.
mhm. And speaking of poor, that actually, I like how this happens. One of the something that I think is very easy to do, where so I guess this one would be more of encouragement and advice. Of you have two extremes: those
Mhm.
who really don't have much means and can feel very discouraged of
Right.
being able to obtain anything like this. And then you have the other opposite extreme where there is all in, they're really enthusiastic, really have that tendency to get in over their head, want too much to do. And then that also can get is discouraging as well. So you have those two opposite extremes where it just feels like it's so unattainable, and those who are like, oh, I want to do all these things, and then you just get in over your head. What would be your encouragement and your advice to those two ends of the spectrum?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure I have a chapter in here that talks about like if you don't have a lot of money,
Mhm,
how to get into this thing for the least amount of money that you can.
mhm,
So, selling a lot of stuff you don't need is one way to get yourself a little bit of money, but you're going to have to do research. You know, you're going to have to. There's a real estate company that sells just rural properties. I'm pretty sure it's called United Country Realty, and they have listings for the whole country. So you're going to have to sift through where property is for sale, and you're going to have to do some real looking at where is it, because you can buy really cheap property out in the middle of Arizona, but to be realistic, are you going to be able to get any water on it at all?
mhm,
If you do research to dig a well there, it's like 10,000 feet and it costs a lot of money. Shalom, everybody who showed up. We're still going. We can't really type back to y'all, but we will stop and cover a few comments as we go on. Anyway, but what you're going to want to keep looking for is a small amount of property that doesn't cost you a lot of money, and then do even more research to, is it something I will be able to homestead? Can I pull an RV or a camper out there?
mhm,
Because the camper Pastor and I bought and lived in only cost $300 used, but it was a camper trailer. It was very small, and we were willing to live in that for those 2.5 years. If we had bought 1 acre, and when we came out here, I think an acre was around $2,500, might even have been less. If we had bought 1 acre and put that camper on it, that's homesteading,
mhm,
right? So
mhm,
you're going to think small if your money situation is narrow. You're
mhm,
just going to take your expectations and make them smaller, but also be realistic and do the research so that when you can find something that's available for you, it'll be something you can afford that won't be problematic, if
mhm,
that makes sense.
mhm,
There, there was also really inexpensive land when we bought our land. Um, Up in Minnesota, I think it was. I mean, really nice 200-acre farm with a barn and everything else. Very, very affordable. But we had to have that talk. All right, are we willing to go through a Minnesota winter?
mm,
If you're not, then that was not a deal. And obviously, we didn't buy it.
mhm,
So you want to be realistic and you want to do your research and really find out what you're going to be getting with that money you're going to be spending.
mhm,
But you can absolutely start homesteading on 1 acre with a camper trailer.
mhm,
Our first off-grid stuff, like our electronics, were the smallest solar panels that Harbor Freight sold. I think it was like $250, and it was just 100 watts,
mhm,
which is not much. Can't run a computer off of it, but you could charge a phone.
mhm,
So by starting small and you get your experience, then if you are successful on your homestead and you grow something you can sell and you get a little bit more money, you can upgrade, right?
mhm,
Um, Now, for the person who thinks, I'm going to do it all and I'm going to dive into this thing because I love it, and you don't do well, there will come a time for you to learn that lesson.
mm,
Because there was a time with me, after having done chickens many, many, many times, that I thought all my chickens had been killed by a neighbor's hunting dog, because we left and I knew my chickens were out and I saw the dog heading towards our house. And so when I came home, I think I cried for a good 20 minutes thinking of these dead chickens. And then come dark, they all came out of the woods and they were all alive. And I thought, oh my gosh, lady. You cannot cry 20 minutes for every bird you lose. And you didn't even really lose them. Like you're going to have a nervous breakdown. And that was kind of my homesteader moment when I'm like, all right, I've got to either get stronger or I'm going to have to quit this thing. And if you decide you're going to quit it, that's fine. Then sell your homestead to someone else who's looking for a homestead and say, yep, the coop's already built. The fences are up. And here's the pear trees where I planted them. Good luck, buddy. I'm going back to the city.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that experience yet, you will get it. That's one thing I can guarantee. The homesteading life teaches you lessons whether you want to learn them or not.
And some of them seem like they can be rather
Oh yeah.
hard
Yeah.
and strong.
When you name your little goat, Curly or whatever you name it, and then he dies for whatever reason, sometimes you're not even sure what happens. You either decide, I don't care, I'm going to name all my goats anyway, or you start being like, all right, you're goat number 1, you're goat number 2, you're goat number 3, because it's like Charlie didn't make it, Curly didn't make it, and I'm tired of thinking up names,
I've heard don't name the animals.
right? Or lunch, dinner, and breakfast for some of them. It's just,
That's a good point.
it's a very real life with real experiences and stuff.
And that's good for us too. And it
Yeah.
helps us to get more acquainted with reality and
Mm-hmm.
figure out what we can and cannot handle and where we
Yeah.
need to grow.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which that's the point of life anyways. You're supposed to be growing. So
Right.
um so when it comes to organizing, you talk about that. I really like the charts that you have in the back. And I
Oh,
like
thank
how
you.
you even I loved it when I was going through it, how it has even the 11 your home and your life. I like that. And you mentioned like homeschooling and the Sabbath. So how would you so since you do homestead and you have experienced this for years and years and you've done things with even littles and homeschooled and you do this with observing the Sabbath, um,
Excuse me.
what would your advice be for those for you have those who homeschool and those who don't. So there's kind of two different categories there because
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be separate, but sometimes it actually really is depending on your
Right.
schedule and where you
Right.
are in your homeschooling journey. But with prep for Sabbath and the other appointed times
Mm-hmm.
and homeschooling, well, we talked about homeschooling, but for Sabbath prep and the appointed times, what is your advice for those that either they're struggling or it's just maybe life feels kind of chaotic because they're new to this or they have children and you know how life can be sometimes where it's a little hard and overwhelming and when you're trying to learn other things and that can be difficult for the homesteading and Sabbath prep and observing the Sabbath when you're trying to run a homestead, that you have to take care of plants and all of that, but especially when there's animals, livestock, and chickens, and all that, where it's still things that you need to take care of, and you can't neglect that. And there might be things that pop up, and there's a lot of prep that goes into it, I'm sure. So, what would your advice be to those categories of people?
Okay. So another really good question. Um, I had a sort of epiphany when we first got into keeping Shabbat. Hey, lamp keeper. Because I was of the mindset I had to make everything perfect. I had to make everything perfect. Because someone had said, imagine if Yeshua was coming to visit,
Mhm,
and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to do everything. And I became so stressed out, I couldn't be relaxed on the Shabbat. And
mhm,
so in reading the word and seeing and reading for myself where it said, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath,
mhm,
I had sort of an epiphany in that, wait a minute, we are supposed to be resting. We are supposed to be able to relax on the
mhm,
Shabbat. And so that's when that linked with, well, Yeshua knows everything. Even if I dusted and mopped, he knows it's not pristine in here. And does he really expect that? Right. And so I started to think, okay, what my prep day should look like is doing the things that will allow me to be relaxed on Sabbath and not think I've got to jump up and vacuum that right now.
Mhm.
Or, you know what I mean? And to think about foods that I can prepare beforehand. So on Sabbath, I'm not having to do any prepping. Um, Boil and seethe, the day before is what the word says. And so I had the other epiphany. That's probably where deli food came from. Who
Mm.
else needed to have food already made that you could eat without having to cook it if it
Mhm.
weren't Sabbath keepers, right? So I started to look at that, and some of the meals that we do on a Shabbat would be, sandwiches or a salad already made, like macaroni salad or potato salad, or even lately for Pastor and I made pre-cooked chicken, and we'll just eat the chicken with a salad, things that are really simple.
Mhm.
And that way I'm not worried. A lot of people go ahead and use a crock pot, but in my mind, the crock pot should only be for heating it up, not actually cooking that food,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so, excuse me, those were two things that kind of helped me center myself for keeping the Shabbat or a feast.
Mhm.
Now, we didn't do a lot of the feast prep when our kids were little. We were still Christian then. And by the time we got Torah, our children were older.
Mhm.
But I have grandchildren, and what their parents do is the same thing we already talked about, get them involved in the prep
Mhm.
and get them used to the, because for them, they say a prayer over a meal on a Friday night. Maybe they cook some challah. Um, get the children involved so that I think my oldest grandson gets to say the prayer sometimes, and they all sing a song. Make the feast enjoyable for the children on their level. And one of them, it's super easy. Sukkot's easy too. Come on, you're going camping. Come on, having marshmallows to cook over a campfire and hot dogs. They're in. Is when you do Passover, and it's the 10 plagues. And so you like have the little things they can hold up when the flies are mentioned, or the lice are mentioned, or the boils, or, little figurines for them to do that with. Those sort of things will get them involved. Something else we started to do on the Sukkot was give them a Sukkot gift. And it was usually revolved around camping, like a tent or a sleeping bag or a Dutch oven. Um, I think that's the key a lot of times with little kids, is just let it be their version as well as the adult version.
Mhm.
The little special something for that feast so they look forward to it. And I think there's videos and cartoons and movies about so much of that that could be incorporated, just like the 10 Commandments were for a lot of us for Easter, which we now know as Passover. Charlton Heston parting the Red Sea is still a memory a lot of us old folks have. And, that was Moses parting the sea. So there's Prince of Egypt and, cartoons, videos like that I think would be a good way to incorporate that as well. But prep day, I think, is important. I do. I think prep day, you can have them prep for their Shabbat as well. Okay, we're going to tidy up your room, and we're going to lay out what clothes you can wear, and this is the book you're going to read, and this is the video you're going to watch, and then you're going to have this snack, and you're going to prepare it. Here's your
Mhm.
carrot sticks in the bag in the fridge, so they can have the Shabbat too. But I think prep day is really the key to
Mhm.
getting yourself ready for Sabbath. And
Mhm.
sometimes that spills over even into Thursday.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll do the floors just because I know Friday will be a little bit more hectic and I'm not
Mhm.
going to get to them. And I think it 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 really works as well as like a daily rounds and a weekly round. If your week consists of getting things done Monday through Thursday, and then prepping, Shabbating, and then first day you can hit chores and whatever.
Mhm.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That can make your week just be, we're going to do that each week.
Mhm.
Monday through Thursdays, homeschool stuff, Friday's prep day, Shabbat, and then first day will be chores, shopping, or whatever.
Yep. I like that, and I like hearing other ladies say that. I think that is a theme for especially women, to where it seems my husband used to tell me, "Stop waiting till Friday to do everything. you have the whole week. And here I was, when the kids were little, especially because it's like I'm homeschooling, I got little kids, I'm getting ready for Sabbath, and it's like you kind of feel a little overwhelmed. And he would be like, "You don't have to save it all till Friday." And it's like, that is such a basic thing, but it seems like so many of us tend to do that, and it
Mm,
it makes when you break it up differently, and then the kids used to love it when they were little, getting involved in, not every aspect because let's face it, they're kids and not even adults like doing all of it, but
right,
it's, nice because they get involved, and then it makes them also feel like it's not just for the adults. This is
right,
for all of us, not just the adults. It's not for the kids to get out of the way, be quiet, and leave us alone, and
right.
more of that stuff. And I like hearing other ladies talk about that stuff because it's nice because it's for them too. And so, how would you incorporate the homesteading aspect of all of that into all of the prep and getting things done and not
Oh,
feeling
I see. Yeah,
overwhelmed?
I had forgotten that. Yeah. So some of the homesteading stuff you can't avoid. You will still have to go out. Like for me, um, if I put out double food for my chickens, they eat it all on Friday and they still have nothing for Shabbat. So there are some things you're going to be doing. But because the Bible is agricultural, I think that's kind of understood.
Mhm,
And I think the saying about if your friend's oxen falls in the ditch, you're going to go help them pull it out on Shabbat.
mhm,
I think there's a certain reality to that, but there are ways, like with some of the other animals. Like right now, our goats are um, around a pond with an electric fence, and it has tons of green, so I don't have to mess with them on Shabbat.
mhm,
And a lot of times, Pastor Joe will go up Friday and give his sheep enough water to last them through. Um, because of security things, I have to lock my ducks and chickens up every night. So I just know I'll do that.
mhm,
But I might leave them in the run. Um, and that way they will go from the coop into the run, and I don't have to wait for them all to come in from wherever they've ranged during the day. Sometimes that works. I did sort of set up an automatic feeder for the chickens if I feel like filling it up with the food. But sometimes it's just easier and more pleasant for me to go outside and feed them that way, just so I see what's happening, to just how is everything? Are there any predators around? Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is stuff frozen? But like your garden, there should be no reason your garden can't go a day
mhm,
without you being out in it. So if you need to, water it and weed it during the week so that on Shabbat it's out there.
mhm,
Um, Trying to think if there's anything else. Like obviously you're not going to do your chores. You're not going to put in fencing on the Shabbat. You're not going to plow your field on the Shabbat. All of that, you do it at a different time. And a lot of times for us, it falls to first day,
mhm,
Sunday. We see over Shabbat what needs doing so that on first day, then we
mhm,
hit it. Okay, we're going to move the sheep now. We're going to move the fence. We're going to plant this thing. We're going to go weed that thing. We're going to go gather that thing. And then the other things that go on during the week, you know, pay bills on one day, go shop on this day, sweep the floor Thursday. You know what I mean?
mhm,
It's spread out. So yeah, for your homesteading, obviously, it's the same kind of thing.
mhm.
You just plan to rest. And let me tell you, after you've homesteaded all week, you want to rest on Shabbat. It's not a struggle. It's a, whew, thank goodness I have this break. And something else I wanted to address, because I'm hearing in our conversations, the homeschooling thing can be a little bit overwhelming, like time wise, and I really have to get this done and all that
Mm,
stuff. Um, that lackadaisical attitude I had with my children and teaching them 2.5 hours and just pulling stuff from everywhere, it worked. My
mhm,
kids tested a lot of times way above their grade level. And when they did go back into regular school, they were all three valedictorians of their class, all three of them. So we really need to get out of the industrial mindset that it's got to be a certain way, and to again, the key there is just teach them how to learn
Mhm,
and then let them learn.
mhm,
And I saw it as each child's going to have their little area they're very interested in,
mhm,
then let them pursue that.
mhm.
We have Sarah's daughter is at 9 years old cooking things and selling them. She's like a little baker already and has her own little baker business. My grandsons are in the cattle business with their father. They buy a calf with their chore money and stuff, and then they raise it up and then they sell it and they get the profit. So I think, like you said, those real experiences are just as important. And that's not me saying don't teach them how to read and write and all that, but make it part of life, not life is all about that, I guess.
I completely agree. As I'm sure you've seen, that we actually moved this past winter, and
Right.
we went from a very, very regulated state. And I actually feel bad kind of now because our son went, his whole schooling was through that while we
Hmm.
were there. He's done now, and
Hmm.
I really wish he had the opportunity of that his sister has now, being here, where it's so different because it's easier when you don't have all of that to actually accomplish things like this that you want to do, because you have to do all this other
Right.
stuff, and you have to make sure other things are in there too. And having more freedom makes such a difference. It's such a
Hmm.
blessing when you don't
Hmm.
have that. And
Hmm.
we come from one of the worst states that for that, so
You
it
were
was
smart to
doable.
leave it.
We've wanted to leave for many years, and the father moves when it's his timing and when it's perfect and not a moment before, and you would just have to sit and be wait and just be quiet because we I think we can make it take longer sometimes. But yeah, it is amazing, and I absolutely agree. It makes a difference when they don't have to just sit there. And some kids like doing more of the worksheets. They like doing more of the
Sure.
academics. And but mixing that up is just it's amazing. And you can hit all those subjects anyways in life and doing other things. And cooking is fractions a lot
Oh,
of
yeah,
the time. So
absolutely.
and that I think that actually can make learning fractions easier than
Right.
staring at a worksheet and trying to like mentally think through these things, at least for those children who are more hands-on and more visual in that way, and it's easier for them to learn. And that's one of the things that I think with homeschooling that is really great, because we can tailor it to our children. We don't have
Right.
to do it any one particular way. We don't have to replicate school,
That's
and
right.
we don't have to. Sometimes it's hard to come out of that mentality, but we don't have to, and I like
That's
that.
right.
So, but yeah, it's so nice to hear others talk about things like this, because it really there are some who are really into no have to get through all these textbooks, have to get through all this stuff, and then they wonder why their children aren't enjoying it in the same way.
Right.
They still have to do what they're told. They still need to complete the work that you give them, but we can make it such a better. I mean, how many of us really liked a lot of the stuff that we had to deal with for us
Right.
going through the school system? I know what I felt like and what I would have liked to have been able to do. And it makes a big difference. And children
Right.
learn differently. They don't, little kids learn by doing. So,
Yes.
and they catch on faster and it's fun for them. And
Right.
when our son was little, I used to have him, little 4-year old, 5-year old boys have lots of energy,
Yeah, they
and
do.
and there's nothing wrong with the energy. So I used to put things on the floor and be like, okay, well, I'd say a word that he had to learn for vocabulary or spelling or whatever it was. It's like, all right, we'll find this word, or find give him a math problem or whatever it was. And I'd have things all over the floor. My living room would be covered, and he'd jump to whatever the answer was or what he thought the answer was, and
Yeah.
spell words out, and he'd spell this word, and he'd jump to the different letters spelling it, and learning and using energy and exercising.
Right.
So,
Brilliant.
things like that. Yeah, I like homeschooling. I like children learning and seeing those light bulbs go off.
Me
And I
too.
think, and really, like, I think a lot of the stuff that you have in your book can really help um, give lots of opportunities for children to learn, and for um, parents to see that this stuff is doable and you can
Mhm.
incorporate it all together, and it doesn't. have to be so chaotic, and it doesn't have to be so overwhelming. And you did a
Right.
really good job in the book presenting it. And it seems like, not it seems, but it is very important, it appears, to plan. And
Yes.
whether you like it or not, because I know a lot of people don't like planning things out, it seems like it's not going to, at least not go as well as it could. And that possibly, I would assume, by a lot, if you don't take the time and plan things out very, very detailed. And, some of us don't particularly like having to completely plan everything out. And I'm a planner person. Some of it seems a little daunting, but it seems like it's really worth spending the time, the things that, even the tiny details that you mentioned. It seems like it actually saves a lot of hassle, and
Yes.
a lot of, if you don't plan certain things out, it seems like you can actually wind up being disappointed because something's not going to work if you don't plan it out, and it can be a waste of time, effort, money, and resources.
Absolutely.
So, do you have anything you'd like to say to that, to add to that you think would be good for anyone to hear?
Sure. I think you're spot on with that. And I'll give an example, the grapes. So there are grapes here that are 60 feet tall. They've been growing up in the tree trying to get to the sunlight. And the Bible talks about grapes in a vineyard and pruning, and the Father prunes those he cares about, and you will bear more fruit if you're pruned. And so I did a couple of videos on the vines and tending them and making wine from them. And you find out very quickly that if you do not prune these vines correctly, they will not bear fruit. And that a tree that, or a vine that's 60 feet in the air, the fruit only comes on the new growth. So that 60 feet of growth is not doing any good.
Mm,
And so that's why you prune a grape back. And so to find out, the Father has a schedule. The best time to prune a grape is in February. And if you work with the Father's schedule, then you'll have new growth come that summer and you'll get a lot of fruit. But if you prune in the wrong time of year or you don't prune at all, you're not going to get a lot of new fruit. And so to be productive, especially in an agricultural setting, a homesteading setting, you need to pay attention to things like um, spinach can be planted in February. So can onions, so can garlic, so can other things. But if you try to plant your tomato in February, in most parts of the country, it will get too cold and die, and you will get nothing from your tomato plant. And then that also segues with a lot of people start their plants indoors in February. And by May or June, when it's warm enough in your area, you can take your little start plant that's 6-10 inches long and put it outside. And now you will get fruit during summer, which is the best time for you to process it,
mhm,
instead of December when it's cold outside and it's not any fun for you. So it's part of, I think, the Father's plan. I think it's part of the old way. And that's why I included some of the calendar that I did in here, because those calendars are thousands of years old. They've known for thousands of years when you prune your fruit and how you do it and how you tend your orchard. And all we have to do is accept the information.
mhm.
Thank you, Yahweh. Thank you, forefathers and everybody else for writing it down for us somewhere and for us to have that information and to save ourselves, just like you said, from disappointment, from failure, from starvation. Um, there's a whole huge thing about grapes and wine, and I did a video on it. In that, in Armenia, there's a mountain there. Shalom, you guys, good to see you, Rachel and Christy. uh, Mount Ararat, where they think the ark rested after the 40 days. Well, that's in Armenia. Armenia was the first country to nationally declare itself a Christian nation. It When it opened up, because it's been closed for a very long time, um, wine people from all over the world went there because the Armenian wine tasted different from other countries' wine. And they were curious, what's going on? Let's look at the vine and see what's going on. Come to find out, all the vines in Armenia are the great grandparents of all the other vines in the world. And Noah stepped off the ark, and what did he do? He
Mhm.
planted a vineyard. Not only that, one of the earliest winemaking operations was found on Ararat at the base of the mountain. So I didn't write that. I didn't make that up. This is all archaeological fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I found grapes on our property, I said, I can't live here, be a Bible believer, and not try to tend some of these vines and make the wine. And the wine recipe I use is very, very simple. It turns out a sweet, very pleasant wine. And I'm not even a wine drinker. I'm not even a drinker of any kind, but I couldn't not say, thank you, Father, for what you gave us, and let me try your way and see how this works.
That's neat.
It's great. It's great. Free. Come on, they're all over this property. If I tended every vine here, I'd be busy all year long.
That's really neat. It's really neat. And it's neat to watch the vines of the grapes and how they grow, and it's a long process, it seems, to watch the new growth come in and then to end up with the grapes. I remember watching
Mhm.
that where we're from a neighbor, and it was like it took months and months and months, but it was like they were really good.
Yeah.
It was neat. That's
And
really
the leaves, even like the animals love to eat the leaves. So I feed them to my husband's rabbits and like our goats when I can. And you can cook them. You can wrap rice and hamburger and bake it. That's a Greek thing called dolmades. And also you can put grapes into pickles and it's supposed to help it stay crisper. Grape leaves, yeah. So like it's so many blessings. That's how the Father works. It's not just one. You get a multitude.
that's cool. I'll have to try that. I like pickles. That's really cool. What a blessing that seems like it is. It is, not
Absolutely.
seems, but it's such a blessing. And it's neat that you have all those vines around you and they were just there waiting
They were
for
just
you.
here.
That's really cool. Um, Also, in your book, later on, you talk about duh moments. And I believe it's on page 51, I believe. But
All right.
the
Let me look.
thinking ahead.
All right, page 51. I've got vehicles on there. Why do I not?
Let me make sure. I thought I wrote it down. Let me check. I might be wrong. Under weight and gravity.
Oh, okay.
There's that. Yeah. And you talk about the oops and the duh moments and things like that. Uh, what kind of summary would you like to give? Because I think those kind of things are very important, and it's good that you put that in there. But it also, I think, can flow into many other things with life, and I assume with homesteading, with many different aspects of it, whether it's gardening or the where you're talking about that with the equipment. But there's also with animals, with the gardening, with the homes when you're building it. I just assume it can apply all around. So, what wisdom would you like to speak on? Because that actually can be little oops or some very big detrimental oops in
Right.
the
I think that's a really good question. I'm so impressed with how you picked out these little things. Um, I think one thing we as Americans, we have a very short view. I think we don't want to see patterns in oops thinking. And one of the things that I talked about was the garden, or a thing I do bring up to people. The garden that's there, we put into place 3 times using the back to Eden method with cardboard and mulch. And that was not easy. You know, we had to go get all that and hand carry it down and dump it by wheelbarrow full and all that. And I had said, like, we need to see how this water flows down the mountain because the water flows here. We're on the side of the mountain, not the top. And so the whole top collects water and it all drains down in these not rivulets, but like chasms. It's been doing this for a while. It's a big, deep chasm.
Mm.
And there was a runoff like that right up from the garden. And I'm like, hey, we probably ought to deal with this. And 3 times I was ignored because there's more things going on. And 3 times the rains came in the spring like they do and washed the whole garden away.
Mm.
Everything planted in there, all the seeds, all the seedlings, whoosh, right on down the mountain. And so by the fourth year, fourth time, we finally figured out, and a neighbor had a backhoe and offered, do you need any work done? And we said, yeah, right here, dig us a trench. Dig us a trench right here. So the water goes down the trench and not across the garden. And so now the garden is where it is. And it still gets water because the water comes, there's a lot, but it doesn't wash the whole garden away.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've done things. I guess I can sum it up is, and try to learn a lesson from your failure.
Mm.
Because supposedly, I don't agree, but insanity is trying the same method over and over and thinking the result will be different.
Yeah.
And we Americans are like, but Wheel of Fortune, if I go on there enough, eventually I'll win. Or, you know what I mean? Like, we're willing to gamble that luck will be on our side because we're happy Americans. And sometimes you just have to read the writing on the wall. You have been tried, you've been weighed, you've been measured, and you've been found wanting.
Yes, that's
So,
very true.
right? And so it's the same with any of your homesteading experience. Like, I have a scientific mind. So to me, things should be tested. If I have a theory, I should test it to get a result so I can then decide if this was smart or not. One of them is leaving eggs out when it's going to freeze. They're in a coop, they're in a nest. Will they actually freeze? What will happen to the egg if I don't go get it?
Mm.
Well, yeah, sometimes they don't crack, but it does freeze. And so when it thaws and you pour it out, it's all running, but it's still edible. But sometimes you leave them out there, and this is what happens with ice cubes and all sorts of things. When that water freezes, it cracks the egg.
Mm.
And so now when it thaws, the yolk's going to run out and it's going to be contaminated.
Mm.
And so it's not good for you to eat. Okay, then now you must apply that.
Mm-hmm.
It's cold, it's dark out there. Do I want to go out and get all the eggs out of the coop? And if I don't, I have to understand I may lose 10 eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And is it okay for me to do that? Do I have 20 in the house? And well, whatever, they'll lay another 10 eventually. Or do I say, all right, get up, put your boots on, put your coat on, get your headlamp on, and go out there and get them?
Mm-hmm.
So it's that. It's seeing a pattern, understanding a cause and an effect, and cutting off the effect if you want the right result.
Sounds like
Dig
discipline.
the trench, right? Dig the trench. Don't plant that garden again until you sort that out, kind of thing. So I hope that answered that question.
It did. It did. Yeah, a lot of discipline. It's not the same as do I feel. I mean, we still should, but it's not the same as I don't know if I feel like washing the dishes right now. Maybe I'll leave
Right,
them in a couple hours. That's very different than disciplining yourself and doing it whether you want to or not, because the alternative can be these other things. And like you said earlier, some of this can lead to starvation if you don't do it. So you're either going to do it or you're not. And I think here in this country, I mean, in general now, I think all over the world, not everywhere, obviously, but there, especially in this country, we're very spoiled and
Yeah,
very detached from what we really are, have become detached from nature and from reality of what could happen in circumstances. And
right. Consequences. And I can give one other short example where when my goats are having babies, I trust, because many times they have the babies and there's no problem. But this year has been one of those years where, oh my gosh, there have been problems right and left. And so I left, we went on a trip, and I knew I had a goat who was probably going to kid. And we had a family willing to come check the property for us. But I told them, like, she's probably going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Well, this couple came and checked, and that mama had just had twins in freezing, snowy weather. And so she called me and said, hey, there's 2 baby goats here. What do I do? She had no idea how to deal with that. And I had just assumed, no, they'll be fine. No, it wasn't fine. And so she wound up having to milk the mom to get the colostrum in that storm, and then making sure these babies drank some of it, which is not an easy thing when they're, the size of a kitten.
Mm.
How do you even get it in their mouth? They can't, a spoon's too big, all that. And she did it and kept them warm, and they survived. She saved both kids and had never done anything like that in her life. So there was a consequence to my lackadaisical attitude. There was a blessing that the Father brought them there because they didn't need to come that day. We told them you don't have to, but they did. And then there was a trust between her and I. She asked for my advice and I gave it, and she did it exactly and saved that livestock. So we're talking real world circumstances, real world situations, and real world relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it builds a bond too. Like if I asked you for advice and you said, well, you shouldn't live in that state with all those regulations, and I take your advice and I don't live there, then you and I have a bond. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for giving me the right advice and making my life easier.
Mm-hmm. That would be my advice. Don't go there. Don't go there. Oh, and speaking of the goats, we actually had some that we were around that was very interesting at a farm the kids and I did some stuff at, which was a lot of fun. But they're interesting creatures. They're fun. They're cute. Boy, they're interesting. And in your book, you talked about the llamas and how you went and looked and
Mm-hmm.
decided no. And so you
Mm-hmm.
went with goats.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you still want llamas someday, or going and seeing them, are you like, no, never? Or do you still want to someday? Where do you stand with that? And what's your journey with the goats been like?
Right. I'm okay not doing the llama thing. I think they're fascinating. I think if I was 10 years younger and physically stronger, I could probably handle it. I think having a llama would be interesting if you trained the llama to carry a burden, which they can do, or if you sheared them and did something with their wool,
Mhm.
or even milked them. Some useful thing from the llamas, because the ones I saw were really big. Sorry. And so, yeah, I'm not really keen to go out and get into all that now. The goats that I have are not the ones I started out with, obviously. I started out with full-size dairy goats, and some of them physically were a little bit of a challenge for me when I was in my 50s. And so after I had my brain surgery, we downsized the goats and got pygmy goats, miniature goats.
Mhm.
Nigerian dwarfs, they're a delight. They're really cute. They're not big enough to cause the same kind of harm that the full-size goats could do, like bark a tree. Like I had goats completely bark a tree all the way around and kill it. These little ones don't seem to be as dedicated to that. They're easier to use, train, milk, etc. And we do still have them. I think our flock or herd now is up to 14 or something. And mainly they're for milking. Not that I did this year, I'm too lazy, but they know how to be milked. I train them how, and I know how to milk. And if I need to, I can.
Mhm.
And I can teach others. I've taught many, many people how to milk. So it's all a reserve. It's a reserve. And on our property, they are, I wouldn't say essential, but they're pretty valuable as keeping weeds down. I used to tie them to trees and things, and they could circle around with the amount of lead I gave them, so they could clear an area around the tree, and then I'd move them around the property. But now with the electric fencing we have, we can fence in an area and they can go in there and nibble all sorts of things. And it helps us not have to go in there with weed whackers
Mm.
and whack everything. So that's, yeah, I like the goats. I know the goats. I'm pretty good. I've helped them birth. These ones this time around, we had some problems. So I had to go to the vet. I even had one get a cesarean section this year, which was like, blew my mind. That one, they could do it. It was a single vet all by herself. And she did it in like 45 minutes and brought her back out to me and said, here, give her these meds. You can go home. And I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
For a human, it's not that easy. So um I feel like I could probably become a goat consultant if I wanted to, but I'm just, I'm almost too lazy. It's like I got enough on my plate. I don't, maybe when I get a little older or something. I don't know. But yeah, I'm still good with my goats.
Goats are an interesting animal to watch. They're so funny and they can be stubborn. And if they want to get out of a gate, oh, they will run you right out of the way.
Right?
And,
They're very smart. Apparently, on the scale of livestock, pigs and goats are as smart as dogs.
oh, wow.
Yeah,
I'm
so they
not
can be taught
surprised.
things. Yeah, and they can be taught things, but they can also be like the gate has a way for me to open it and I can do it or I can hop over it. So yeah, you have to be one step ahead of them.
And you have to be paying attention because they're fast.
Yeah, they are.
But they're fun. And it seems like chickens, goats, and sheep are a lot of the are the main animals that I hear that people want as livestock on their homesteads. So it's good for them to know what they're getting into
Right. And,
because
and I think there's value in all of that. I think um oh, thanks trying and doing. That's awesome. Um the sheep we just got this year, we got a kind of meat sheep, so we don't have to shear them. And I told my husband, I don't know anything about sheep. Supposedly they're very fragile. And we were gifted just a few from a friend. Well, these sheep clear where the goats will nibble a lot of different things, but they will leave some grasses and things they're not as fond of. The sheep are like lawnmowers. They will completely clear an area up to as high as they can reach eating wise. And it was a surprise to us. We were like, oh, these guys are effective. This is really cool. So we've been rotating them and the goats through areas that got like jungly down here. We have so much foliage down here in the summertime. Shalom, JS Badger. Um, so that was a surprise. But I think your main reasoning, at least ours, behind those three animals, the chickens are going to give you meat and eggs. The goats will give you milk and you can make cheese and you can butcher a goat and have goat curry or goat barbecue. The sheep is also very edible. We've had several roasted sheep amongst our group down here, very tasty, and they clear the area like lawnmowers so very well. The difference between the sheep and the goats, very biblical. I'm sure you're familiar.
Mhm.
The sheep hear their master's voice and they will come to him, right? They flock together. The sheep, you cannot separate sheep out. They get very upset about that. So you have a unit that you can move around who will follow you. And that's very valuable.
Mhm.
The goats are, way more independent minded. They still don't like to be too far apart, but they are way more curious, way more, get into stuff, mess things up. But they also will come. Like if you have a little treat, and I have treats, sunflower seeds and stuff, they will come to me also. They know who I am. And I can do things with them. I've trained them to be able to give them shots, trim their hooves if I need to, touch their horns, things like that. But the main thing about all of them is they're small enough to be handled by you and me.
Mhm.
When you step up to something like a llama or a cow
Mhm.
or a camel or a giraffe, they are way bigger and way harder. Not so much to handle because you can teach cows to be handled. When a cow steps on your foot,
Mhm.
and that's 1,000+ pounds versus a 65-pound goat,
Mhm.
there's a difference.
Oh yeah.
If that cow wants to bust through your fence, you're not going to be able to stop it.
Mhm.
I mean, 5-strand barbed wire is really not that strong, but it's just enough that most cattle respect it. So I think that's why a lot of people start that way. It's less expensive. I can stick 12 goats in the back of a pickup truck. I can stick one cow, and you can put 20 chickens in a large dog crate and you can put two goats in there. You cannot put one cow in that thing to move it.
Right.
So I think that's a lot of the key to why homesteaders are doing it that way.
Mhm. So, is there any other takeaways that you would like for anyone to know for what you've written? We've talked about an awful lot. There's an awful lot that is in it. I do highly, highly recommend it.
Right?
I've already started sharing it with other people.
Oh, thank you so
I'm
much.
definitely
Yeah.
going. Yeah, it's good. I'm definitely
Thank
gonna
you.
be sharing it, and I have friends who do homestead, who do farming, who do gardening, and I'm absolutely gonna be recommending this. And some of them
Right.
are new, some of them are seasoned.
There's are the takeaways. The
Mhm.
homesteading hands in the back. So you'll have to buy them to get those little
Yep.
nuggets. But no, thank you so much. It's been a really, really pleasant interview. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Me too.
Um,
Thank you.
anytime, anytime you want to do a joint live stream, just let me know. We can talk about other things too.
Awesome.
Uh, it's been a real hoot. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. I have too. I'm so glad been following you for a long time. I already told you that, so before,
Oh,
but this is an honor. It really is. I'm really glad that you reached out. Thank you for sending me the book. It's just it's been a real treat, and I've really enjoyed talking with you. And I appreciate you wanting to hop on and talk about something you worked on and were used to create. And I'll definitely be sharing it. I'll definitely be encouraging it, and we'll have to just get it out there. And hopefully, it encourages more people to want to go back to what's more natural for us.
yeah, to the old ways. And the book is available on Barnes and Noble for the correct price, which is $13, and it's free shipping there. Right now, Amazon has it for sale, but it's not, it's somebody else who bought it and then repriced it, and they're charging shipping and stuff like that. So
Oh,
if
okay.
you're interested in it, go to Barnes and Noble first, or if you're telling your friends that, that's a good place to get it right now. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will see you soon. Bless you.
Bless you too. Thank you.
Yep. Shalom.
So long.